Good afternoon. My name is Bonnie, and I will be your conference operator today. At this time, I would like to welcome everyone to the CA Service Operations Insight Global User Community Webcast. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question-and-answer session. If you would like to ask a question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you would like to withdraw your question, press the pound key. Thank you. I would now like to turn the conference over to Mr. Stephen Sheldon. Please go ahead, sir.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for attending the Service Operations Insight Global User Community for August of 2013. We're going to have a pretty unique webcast today. This is going to be an open forum for anyone that wants to ask any questions to a variety of CA employees that are all involved with SOI. We're going to have people from product management, development, support, services. And what we're going to be doing first is everyone is going to introduce themselves and briefly talk about what department they're from. And then we're going to be going through a list of pre-submitted questions, answering those and discussing them amongst the panelists today. And then we're going to start taking questions from everyone that has any. Feel free to either submit them by the phone by pressing star 1 or use the Q&A panel within the webcast. We'll be looking at all of those different places for questions, and it doesn't matter the type of question, anything at all that you might be curious about, whether it's about SOI itself or the community, or you've got a specific problem that's broken, you're curious about upcoming features, anything and everything. We just want to get as much involvement as possible here. Got a lot of really great people to talk to. And so before we start doing the questions here, let's start going through our panelists that we have with us today.
Yeah, okay. Hi, this is David Walters from Product Management for SOI.
Hi, this is Jeff Morris. I'm with Solutions Enablement, Customer Enablement, SOI.
This is Kieran Connolly, Product Management for SOI.
Anyone else?
Hey guys, this is Kirk O'Quinn. I'm an Engineering Services Architect with SOI.
This is Ralph Priegel.
Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Ralph, and then Salima.
Yeah, Ralph Priegel. I work on sustaining engineering.
I'm going next.
Thank you, Ralph. And who's next?
This is Peter Lazaro. I'm R&D Architecture for SOI.
Okay, Salima, it's about you out there.
You have Shai Molam here from SOI Product Management as well.
Okay, that's
Hi, it's Salima Abdullahi from Development Manager.
All right, I think that's everybody. Is that correct?
Yeah, Stephen, let's move on.
Sounds good. All right, so for our pre-submitted questions that were emailed in prior to this, we've got 7 here from Kurt Melancon. Let me see if he's on the line yet. Unfortunately, I do not see him on yet. We also have some questions from Kapil Batra. Let me see if he's on. And it looks like Kapil is on. Let me go ahead and do his questions first then, and then come back to Kurt's in case Kurt joins us in a minute here. So these are the questions from Kapil. Bonnie, can you make Kapil a presenter or a speaker?
I think he just needs to press star 1 and then he can speak.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Please press star 1 to have your line open.
We'll give Kapil a minute here to get ready to speak with us.
Kapil's line is open.
Hello, Kapil, can you hear us? Okay, well, if he does have any questions, feel free to ask them or ask in the Q&A if you want to respond to any of the things that the CA employees here are saying about your questions. But let's go ahead and get started with these. So the first thing he's asking is, we have a help desk which understands alert details in a specific format, and we need to send the details depending on message details, like network alarms, removing special characters like pound symbols, hard-coding user-defined fields, chopping FQDNs apart, and parsing through different computer alarms depending on message type. So I'm trying to figure out what the question is exactly here. We need to send the details depending on the message detail. Okay.
So this looks like this is a question around the formatting of the data and some of the properties that need to be passed into Service Desk. So the question, I guess, is the best way to pre-process that material in order to get it into the correct format. And I guess there's nothing at the point at which we pass the data in on the escalation side, but it's possible that we could use the pre-processing capability of the event enrichment layer, which is the mid-tier connector, for example, which has very powerful kind of transformation and pre-processing capabilities. So I'll throw that out there to the panel as one suggestion, but is there any other kind of ideas that we maybe could kick around? Maybe, Selena, you've got an idea for the Service Desk interface?
Yeah, I think I can add a little bit to this. I think what he's getting at, Kieran, is that it seems like he was trying to use EI, but it found it to be a little complicated for certain types of things he was trying to parse, so he ended up writing some scripts for that and wants to know, A, if that's going to be a performance problem, or B, if there's a better way to do it. So I think that I would probably want to understand a little more this is a pretty detailed, specific question. We might, other than maybe somebody can answer about the performance of using scripts versus the EI layer, we could come back to him with some details. I don't know that we're going to be able to get the exact thing answered on this call, getting an example of writing one. But there is a possibility, the third one, that you could inject, through the EI layer, you could put some custom code in through Java, which might perform better than a Perl script. But there's a mechanism for that maybe that's another concept of what he's trying to ask for, which we could follow up with the template.
You said there is a mechanism to do that now?
There's a mechanism, Stephen, whereby the EI policy layer has a mechanism to plug in Java code to it in the middle of it. So if you had some custom code you wanted to do during the enrichment process, you could write a little piece of Java code that would do it instead of the Perl script, and then through some configuration in XML, basically tell the EI layer to go write your code and do a transformation. It's very similar to how we do a JDBC enrichment, but it is a little bit of configuration that you have to do.
Is that in the documentation of any kind in SOI?
I believe it's documented somewhere. I think Ralph probably knows our documentation cover to cover better than most. Is that documented, Ralph, or is that something that we have separate?
Yeah, this should be documented where event policies are discussed.
Yeah, that's what I would think.
So I guess one key point here is that the help desk is not presumably one of the standard set that we support, so it's a custom help desk interface. So that may be relevant. But.
Right. I mean, it seems like, if I'm reading his message correctly, and I don't know if he wants to respond, he's got the help desk integration working. It's just a matter of how to translate our data into the data that he's got, right? I don't know how he's integrating to the help desk unless it's a custom integration. But if it's through our help desk APIs, then it's just it looks like it's just mapping the data over a certain way so that it fits to what the help desk is expecting, which is a typical thing we would do in the enrichment layer of escalation.
Yep. So I think that's it. The best practice is to use the EI capability, but we'd need to get into some more details if there was some reason why it was felt that wasn't appropriate.
Kapil, does that help answer your question? Give him a second here. And you can press *1 to talk.
Let's take that as a yes. And if there's any follow-up, there's a Q&A window that can be used there to provide additional feedback.
Yeah.
Good, thank you, guys.
Right.
All right, so it looks like Kurt has joined. So let's go ahead and answer his questions now. And Kurt, if you would like to talk, do *1 as well. This is from Kurt Melancon. First question he had is, what's the difference between importing services from Spectrum Service Manager versus creating services from scratch?
So that one I can take. Essentially, so Spectrum Service Manager predates SOI, and it was actually it was going in a certain direction, and it was the Service Manager component was one of the things that was a driver for the design of SOI initially. So the difference simply is that nowadays, if you already have services built out in Spectrum, then SOI will allow you to import that topology. One of the features SOI has in general is that any domain manager, whether it's Spectrum or APM or CMDB, if that domain manager understands service topologies and you've spent some effort in your organization to build out topologies there, we've tried to make it where SOI can consume them so you don't have to start over from scratch. If you're starting out with Spectrum now and you haven't really built services there, the best practice would be to use SOI for service modeling, because that's one of its key features. But the ability to import from Spectrum is simply to support those customers that had Service Manager prior to SOI and wanted to leverage that investment.
Now, regarding the Spectrum services, one thing I do like from those there is the additional SLA capabilities. It doesn't seem like the SLA is quite as detailed in SOI. Do you know if there's any plans to increase the SLA details that you can put into SOI?
So that sounds like a question for product management. Dave, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, to date, we're open to it. We've always sort of pushed more SLA sophistication in to other, at least conceptually, to other portfolio components that we had from Albacore, now called BSI, but we'd be interested in specific requirements in this area.
So Kurt, if you were on now, did that answer your question successfully, or do you have any follow-up questions? *1 to ask or respond. All right. So let's go ahead and move on to the next one then. He asks, how can I change the type of service in SOI? They all seem to be the same type currently. For example, creating a business process service.
So USM does not distinguish between types of services at the moment, the language. So it's just a service. There's no special processing around different types of service. It's more about how you organize them internally. When you build your services out in the modeler, you can categorize them if you like.
It's a good point, Jeff. I was going to say one of the features that we're adding to the forthcoming release, SOI 3.2, will allow us to differentiate between customers and services, because we found that many of our existing customers were creating services at the top level that identified the customer that was associated with a particular service provider realm. So we will differentiate to that degree, but again, at this point, not between different types of service, and it'll certainly be interesting to understand what the requirement was there in terms of maybe the way, root cause or impact analysis was performed on different types of service.
Hey, this is Bert. I'd like to add one more thing, because you can certainly change the behavior, how the impact is propagated up in a service, depending on the type of service you plan to use, by using custom relationships or adding a policy on the relationships. So if looking for, it's different behavior when it's a business process service versus when it's infrastructure service, you can do some customizations there.
Thank you, everyone. Next question, how are MTTR and MTBF calculated in SOI? And why are there not pre-calculated fields as there are in Spectrum?
Well, so I think I'm right in saying that we actually do not calculate MTTR and MTBF in SOI at this point. We do calculate availability, which is the availability of the service over a 24-hour period. But unless anyone knows otherwise, I think at this point that would be an enhancement request to include that information. And I guess one question I would have maybe to the team here, the panel, would be whether this applies to services or whether this is applying to the components of the service.
I think something like MTTR would probably be like how long an alarm is open on average. Now, is that the kind of thing that we could use like the reporting feature to report on right now, or is there no way of getting that?
That's a good question. So there certainly are ways to report on ages of alarms and average time on queues and that sort of thing, so there may well be an area there. That may be something that perhaps Kurt could go and investigate if, again, if a panel don't have a specific recommendation there to see if there's anything there that would meet his requirements.
Anyone else have anything to elaborate on that?
Well, I think you'd want, for mean time to repair, some configurable parameters to set. I don't think that if any alarm in particular goes off in a service, that automatically means that the service is not providing its functionality. I think, there should be some configurability around the service itself, and what does it mean when a service is out of service and incapable of delivering its functionality. So I think there's more to it, and you can make it as complicated as you want, but I think merely looking at a single alarm or the greatest level of alarm doesn't give you an indication of whether the service is performing as indicated. And you would need some history, because not every alarm, is looked at as the same, right, as to how long it's actually been affecting the service and when it comes back online. So you would need to have some history and continue to maintain that to have an idea of what the mean time to repair is.
And who's this speaking?
This is Peter Lazaro.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So those calculations are made in Spectrum Service Manager. Would a similar structure be implemented at some point in SOI?
I would certainly think so, as the evolution of SOI continues to grow. It seems to be a very fundamental statistic to keep for services in general.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Sure.
Our next question, is there the ability to degrade a service or its SLA and SOI through the service desk ticket or some other manual integration outside of the Spectrum availability traps?
I can take this one, I think. If you're trying to just change the degradation level, you'd have to, I don't know if you could be able to actually reset it, because the propagation is just a calculation. You'd have to set your service model up in a way so that you could get an event back in through the event layer to do that.
That's what we suspected.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. You basically have to create a cut. If you want to, if you basically, so if you think about the way SOI works, there's a propagation algorithm that calculates the degradation level of the service based upon all of the components of that service. And it's well defined as to how that works in the service model. So you can't really just change it on the fly. If you're basically wanting to say, look, I know I want the service to now not be considered critical, I want it to be considered moderately degraded, and ignore everything else that the domain managers are telling you about it, basically wanting to override that. If that's the request, what you would have to do is set up a CI that you could propagate at the highest priority in your model, and then have a custom event come back out of service desk to hit that CI, which would then force the degradation to change somehow. I'm not sure if that's, I mean, I'm thinking outside the box here, thinking off the top of my head. I'm not sure if it's really possible. It's not something
the main solution that we had somewhat brainstormed. We were wondering if there was any other way to, or a faster way to do it, but we thought of basically a mock CI that would be critical to the service that we would manually manipulate.
Yeah, and as I was thinking it through, the only problem I think is you're basically trying to, if you're trying to lower the service, I don't think you can ignore everything coming from all the other CIs, even if you had a custom CI, so that might be problematic. So my question really would be, going back to the requirement, is what's the business case around that? In other words, are you basically saying I don't believe what the service model is telling me about its current state?
So let's look at performance versus availability, and I'll just be transparent. We do not have a full performance monitoring suite stood up, and so this would be a stopgap solution that looks at the end user's perspective, which is reflected through the service desk, and utilizing that data stream to, in essence, affect the service and how it's monitored, but also in historical reporting to make it more accurate to what the end user experience was.
Okay, well, so that's a little different, and that's basically saying you want to take that into consideration, which is less than just simply an override. So then the mechanism we were kind of talking about is the way you'd want to have to do it. You'd basically create a custom CI that would represent the customer experience as seen by service desk. And then you'd basically send a custom event to it to set, the state as service desk sees it, and then you build your service model in such a way that you weigh that customer experience versus the other data in an appropriate fashion that makes sense to how you want to look at weighting. Because ultimately, the weighting of that comes down to how you want to view the world. And in my experience with SOI customers, everybody looks at this slightly differently. So the framework is there to let you be flexible with that. So as long as you're working within that framework, I think that's how you could do it.
I know in our environment, there are a lot of situations where we'll get a lot of complaints from users everywhere just saying that our application is completely down and our service looks fine in SOI. And what that just is an indicator to us of is that we don't know everything about that application yet. And so we still need to work on building it out as a service. We need to figure out what CIs we're missing, but we still want the availability numbers to be accurate. And so, yeah, we would love a way to manually degrade services as well.
It's a stopgap, knowing that you don't have 100% of availability, performance, or integrity mapped or monitored through technology. You need an insertion point to allow the process to do that for you.
Yeah, and basically, and so Stephen, to follow up with what you're saying, you're absolutely right. There really are two parts to the equation, right? There's what are we measuring from the data center. If you look at the SOI design, there's quality and risk, right? And risk is sort of everything the data center tells you about what's going on. And if you're missing pieces, you won't know that there's something wrong, right, if you don't have full coverage. But then the quality metric is what am I measuring? If you use CEM, our CEM product, for example, you're measuring on a web application and user experience. And that's a very hard metric to say, look, users are either getting good response time or not. In the absence of that, you have these custom places where you're getting calls from the help desk. So you could create something to send an alarm that basically says, look, the quality is lower than I want. And then if you set the quality as a driving factor behind the health of your service, then it all fits into the overall SOI framework for how we describe service state. In fact, that's one of the things we're looking at making some improvements on in upcoming version, is how we distinguish between the quality and risk and impact versus problems. But that would be the technique I would use in the absence of any raw data feeds. But we do have the framework to support all of that, the event integration and so forth. You just need to send us an event, and then you could map that event. I mean, even if it was a trap, you could map it to the Snmp connector pretty easily into a CI that you create through that mechanism as well. And 3.2 is going to have some kind of even some GUI-enabled features around processing traps. So that would be an easy way to take in custom data.
I mean, another possible scenario, too, is if some of your domain managers are having problems while some of your services are degraded, and you can't get the right traps and alarms coming from those domain managers. So you just want to manually adjust the service then at that point.
So Stephen, are you saying over and above everything we've discussed, are you saying that you would just basically want some way where someone could go in and override? Because I think what Kurt was saying is that he's just trying to make up for the fact that he doesn't have monitoring and figure out what's the right plumbing way. But reality, you're saying even over and above that, you'd want some manual way to say, look, even though this thing is saying it's degraded, I want to change it just so that to drive other stuff.
Well, yeah, I can see value in it, definitely. I mean, for various reasons.
And that actually leads into the next question quite well, because a similar mechanism could be used for that purpose.
So his next question there is, can you edit event data attributes to reflect when maintenance was conducted but not recorded properly during the event? So like retroactively do maintenance modes?
Correct. So we logged an outage because somebody forgot to put it in maintenance mode. We don't want it to affect the the SLA because it was a planned maintenance. So we would go back and edit that event as planned maintenance, even though it was originally recorded as not being so.
Right.
And I believe
so
this is provided in Spectrum to a certain extent.
Right. So we've looked at this recently, and this is a roadmap item for us, but we can't give a date on it quite yet. But it's an outage editor type of thing. We've had multiple customers now asking about it, and certainly seems to have a use case that's getting more and more popular out there.
I like that name, Outage Editor.
Yeah, you're basically talking about going back and editing history to reflect, if it was bad data somewhere, you don't want your reports to be messed up, right? That was what you're getting at.
And so if it's on the roadmap, I think maybe looking at the scope of including the prior issue where you could do the inverse, right? Not only an outage editor or maintenance issue, but being able to likewise enter a service degradation event of some sort. So those two might be able to be combined with a similar mechanism.
Yeah, that's an interesting inverse case that we may not have considered actually. So that's a good addition to the request, definitely.
Thank you. All right. You were also wondering about integrations with ServiceNow, including CMDB.
Yeah,
I'm not familiar with ServiceNow myself.
So ServiceNow is a CMDB and a service desk company and system out there. So we're in we're in the development cycle on a ServiceNow connector. We're actually in beta, what we're calling beta 1, and we have a couple customers, but we're also interested in additional beta level testing on that. So if you're interested, let us know, and we can take that up.
Yeah, Dave, to add to that, I was on a demo this morning where they were looking at the Beta 2 prospect for the connector for ServiceNow, and it really looked rather impressive, and it seems to be almost complete for Beta 2, so I think you're right. I think we'd be interested in other people looking at it.
Who would we contact if we were interested in maybe even seeing a proof of concept before we were to say sign on for our beta?
You can contact any one of us. I'll take it, david.walters@ca.com, and get you with the right folks.
Thank you.
And as well, if you have specific connectors you're interested in, feel free to post them on the forums or go to the ideas panel as well on the community site and post them there.
Yeah, I mean, an interesting point that somebody brought up before regarding looking at an SOI service and getting complaints from consumers of that service that it's down, and that most of it is coming through the service desk. Is anybody mining that data from your perspective as to whether it is a particular domain that you don't have being fulfilled through SOI through one of its connectors, or is it some domain that you do have backing for SOI that just isn't providing the functionality you think it's providing? That would be very valuable to us, both from our perspective and from your perspective, if you could provide some data with regard to that disconnect.
that question for?
It was to the user community. I mean, one of the gentlemen mentioned that particular point.
I think for us it's a bit of both. I don't know that we have, definitely, like I said, from the availability perspective of how the service is configured, we know that we don't have 100% coverage of what are the CIs that make up the composition of this service. And then from the performance perspective, response times, et cetera, we really don't have, we have a tool or technology in place for that. We don't have a very wide footprint there, and we don't have a lot of, I don't know that we have any process into building out the performance monitoring for the service farm. So I think it's a bit of both for us.
Okay. Yeah, I mean the mining of the service tickets that are causing the complaints may be a nice point to start, and you can glean some of the information from there regarding what needs to be built out or what CIs are missing from the service once the service desk people isolate the problem.
I do think there's a bit of a gap for older technologies. There's a lot out there for performance monitoring, I think, for .NET. But for some of the older footprints out there, which is actually quite prevalent in our technology stack, I think it's a challenge to find monitoring technologies for some of those without a large level of effort to implement.
Yeah, and this is that's Kurt, I think, so speaking, right?
Correct.
One of the things that's relatively new is this concept of measuring quality independent of what's going on in the data center, just trying to look at the customer view. And like you're right, there's a lot of technology out there that can do that. WCA has some good technology to do that around web apps, but mapping that in older legacy technologies, it's harder to get at. Well, where do I get those metrics from? How do I know? How do I measure that end user experience on these things? What kind of technology, just for example, are you dealing with, and or are you challenged with? What would, when you say older technology, what would it be? Do you have an example?
We have some VB6 out there, but I think a lot of it, while it's a very large footprint, the interest in, and this is just an internal barrier, the interest in the effort to build anything out, to acquire technology and then build out or mimic transactions to monitor that, it's a pretty large effort for something that should be a sunsetting technology, right? And so that's kind of there's an internal barrier there that this stopgap solution would help. It's a much faster implementation to say, let's just come up with a way to hit the service manually without actually truly live monitoring, right? Because the effort for live monitoring on an older technology from an end user experience is a pretty significant undertaking, rather than just saying, let's find an easy way to reflect reality was less than what we would like it to be.
Thank you. Our last question from him is there a plan to address the lack of out-of-box reporting capabilities compared to Spectrum's Boxy?
So does this imply that you have used the SOI Boxy reporting set and want more, or what?
That is correct. If you compare the two reporting suites out the box, there is a whole lot more capabilities within the Spectrum Boxy compared to SOI, not only in comprehensive coverage, but in parameters and configurability of the reports themselves.
Configurability. Yeah, one of the things we wanted to do as soon as possible is get that reporting data set published as a Boxy universe so that end user custom reporting is enabled. So that's hot on our list. We have sort of a smaller data universe as well to report on than a Spectrum does. So that might be one factor, but I'd be interested again in details of what you think is missing on the reporting aspect from our current data universe, if you will.
Well, we need to move on to the next questions here. Our last set of pre-submitted questions are from Brian Cooney here, who asks, it would be nice if SOI/USM models used a standard field for populating affected device name. It could be server, network device, website, etc. It's very useful to have it stored in a standard field. It's currently getting around this by making event policies and modifications to connector policy files. So, Brian, you can press *1 if you want to elaborate on any of this.
So Peter or Sabo, do you want to take a crack at this?
I could, Dave, but I'm not sure that I'm qualified with regard to the new changes that have been gone into SOI since I've been away.
So if Sabo's not out there, I can take a crack at this. I got a pretty good understanding of what this is.
Is the question, I just want to make sure I understand the question, is that the service itself should have a field that has the state of the affecting device that's causing the status change to the service?
I think I'd work with Brian. I think the issue is the fact that we've got sysname, primary DNS name, computer name. It's that whole problem, right? That ultimately, when we go through the service desk integration, service desk just wants one attribute to be the affected CI name, and you've got to go through a mess to sort of map that. There was some logic built into SSA originally that created an internal thing called hostname, but that was pre-USM. So anyway, I think Sabo may have some more to add to this. I'll turn it over to him.
There is, I mean, Jeff, where you were going was the device ID field, right, which identified the ultimate device. But there is a computer name field, but that may not be sufficient here. So I think we have to take this back, do some research on this, and it's a good question. Can we standardize on one field that can be the name of that CI for the life of that CI? So right now, you're right. We kind of go over sysname, DNS name, etc. And it could be, depending on what data we are getting, it could be different. So there is options available to us, but I think we'll have to do some work here.
So Sabo,
yeah, I think we've. I'm sorry.
Yeah, is it something that can be made configurable?
It is something that can be made configurable, but it's not there yet, Peter. So this is one of the issues that we are dealing with, with USM and the correlation.
And this is on the roadmap. So we do just, in fact, having some discussions about this last week. So this is, just to Brian, Jeff, this is something we are looking at how to address. So you can be, I would say, confident we are working on a solution to make this less painful for you in some cases.
And then similarly, he asks if there's any ability to change event and alert severities through escalation policies and actions.
You can do that through the event enrichment.
So, yeah.
And our escalation policy enrichment. Well, you have to pass it back through if you want to change it. You have to basically send the event back through the system. Generally, you catch it at the event layer. I think at the escalation policy, it might be too late. Am I right about that, Sabod?
That is correct. But if if I read the comment, he says, currently I have to manually modify the policy XML file. So it looks like he's already using the event policy to change the severities, but looking for a simpler way to do that.
Yeah.
Now,
so
similarly, below that, he's asking if there's a waiting policy in SOI. And that I do know there is a way to do that, right? Within escalation policies, just simply alert age is more than a certain number of minutes.
That's correct, Steve. You can write escalation policy based on the age of the alert and then take action, either move it to a different queue or even open a ticket or email somebody. So there is a way to do this.
And the template question there, that's a nice idea too, just creating a template and copying it each time.
Yeah, I think that would be like a phase 2. I'll go ahead, Sabod.
Yeah, this has been on the list for a while, right?
So we have some prototypes around this that are certainly something we'd like to explore further with folks. So if this is an area that people think we should invest in, then please shout out and we'll get it into the backlog.
Thank you. And thank you, Brian, for submitting those questions. The last one there I'm not going to address because we talked about that a few minutes ago, but it's good to know that there are multiple people requesting that, the editing of historical outages. All right, now we have Christo Berger asked one question in the Q&A as well. He's asking, I like ITPAM, process automation, SOI action integration, but before a customer invests heavily in it, are there any performance or capacity considerations they should be aware of? So, not sure who on the team here would be most familiar with ITPAM. What do you think, Dave?
Yeah, I'm gonna ask Subodh, maybe. You got any idea on the PAM front? Perhaps not. Jeff,
what about Salima? I think she's worked with it.
Yeah.
I think Salima may be having audio issues.
I'm not sure why my phone keeps going on mute again and again, but I'm here. And so ITPAM, that workflow engine that's already integrated in SOI, works well. Again, performance-related issues, I'm not so sure there are too many of those here, unless you're talking about a very huge volume. Of course, that workflow has to go through its paces, and it all depends on what kind of monitoring or what kind of workflow you're executing through that. So, you know, in general, ITPAM, especially the 4.x engine, is pretty nice. We haven't really encountered any major issues that we'd like to warn you about.
Christo, if you have any follow-up for that, you can either ask in the Q&A or do *1. All right, sounds good. Looks like we have a question from Jim Merritt as well about alert history. Jim, would you care to either do *1 to ask that here or ask in the Q&A and chat, either way?
So this is Jim. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So my question, it's a two-part question. It's about alert history, and the scenario is I have a service that has 4 subservices, and when I get alerts on a subservice, it would be nice if alert history, if I clicked on the top level service and saw all alert history for everything that affected that service. Right now I just get service is slightly degraded due to one active alarm. I have to drill down to each service to find out where that alarm is coming from, and then I have to drill down further to see what the alarm actually is. So the use case here is kind of someone troubleshooting an outage from SOI and wanting to get timelines and what happened, and it's nearly impossible using the alert history.
Completely agree, and I have that same issue.
Okay.
What do you guys think from the CA side? Has there been much demand for that, or do you understand the issue there?
Yeah, I think the issue is well understood. So ability to kind of roll up the alert history, and it has certainly been requested. It's not in the forthcoming release, but it's absolutely something we need to look at because it is a common request.
Okay, and then if I could do a part 2 on that, and I may need some help if Kit's on the phone to explain this a little better, but we have APM, we have traps being sent directly to SOI from APM, and it looks like that those alerts do not get put into alert history. Kit explained it to me once. If he was on the phone, he might be able to explain it better. I just wondered if there was, I think the response was that it's just part of the design. I know this is not a great explanation, but is there any thought about getting these APM alerts to show up in alert history?
So you'll have to explain that to me, Jim, because if it's an alert, it doesn't matter where it came from. It should be behaved like any other alert. If it was an alert in SOI, it doesn't matter. The source is irrelevant to alert history.
So I think
there must be something else behind this.
Yeah, I think what happens there is it changes the severity. The severity gets changed, but the alert never clears. So the severity may change from a critical to a major, and then back to a normal. But I don't think in SOI speak it ever gets a clear alert. Therefore, it doesn't show an alert history.
So are you manually clearing the alerts, or do they just never go away?
Well, the only way they can go away is through a clear.
All right. Well, we should.
So why don't you and I take that back offline? We have a whole bunch of stuff we're working on. Jim, you and I can take that back offline and figure it out.
That sounds good.
This is the first time I'm hearing of it, so I'm sure there's a logical explanation.
Yeah, and Kit has a pretty good rundown from engineering, I believe, on the actual issue. He kind of knows what's going on, so we should loop him in.
Great. Thanks for taking that with him, Jeff. We also have a question from Darius Secession asking, is there a plan to add the ability for an existing escalation policy to trigger a clear alert action emails without having to configure an additional escalation policy to do so? Darius, you can press *1 to elaborate on that if you'd like. Is there a plan to add the ability for
the ability to clear an alert through an escalation policy? Was that the question?
Yeah, I didn't understand that thing again, Stephen. Can you repeat it one more time?
Is there a plan?
It's right there in the chat window, Jeff.
In the chat window?
Yeah.
Yeah, the question for those who can't see is there a plan to add the ability for an existing escalation policy to trigger clear alert action emails without having to configure an additional escalation policy to do so?
So I think I think I'm understanding this. So you're saying you have a policy to clear the alert, but you also, when it clears, you also in conjunction want to also send an email on the same action. That's the question. Because we have I think what he's saying, Stephen, is we have a clear alert action and we have an email escalation action, but he wants the trigger to be one thing that does both.
Darius, if you could either respond to the chat.
Yes, so logically those are two separate actions that you can configure, right?
Yeah, associated with a single policy, so you shouldn't be required to create an entire escalation policy. You should just add a second action.
Well, so I think that the thing, Kieran, is they basically want one action rather than two actions, and that's not the way the facility works. You have the policy that defines the things, and you take one or more actions on it. We don't have a separate set of logic to string actions together into one defined action. So I don't know that there's a way to do that. I mean, I don't think it's part of the design. It would take very design change to make that happen.
Yeah, so but the design is that each action is discrete and sort of logically separable, but you can aggregate them up via a single escalation policy. So the trigger is there, and then it can trigger multiple actions.
Correct. I'm not sure where what the drawback to that methodology is.
Also asking if there is a limit on how many and ors there are that you can put into a policy.
Yeah, no particular limit on that out of the box, no.
Okay, thank you.
So, Stephen, I'm also getting a couple of questions pushed to me from Mary. One, is there a roadmap for availability of using Windows 2012 Server and Microsoft SQL Server 2012? So those are two separate questions. On the SQL Server 2012, we are supporting that rep of the database now with our 3.1 release. And on the Windows Server 2012 question, that's still a roadmap item. We're figuring that out. And I would say waiting. We haven't been really waiting because we've been busy, but there's certain a bit of market traction that all vendors like us have to take before we jump in with the latest Microsoft version. So we'll be doing that, though, as we go forwards.
Reminder, if anyone else has any questions they'd like to ask on the phone, press *1, or feel free to ask them in the Q&A section. I don't believe we have any other calls or anything yet.
Right. I have one more question on IM. Is there a knowledge base or set of examples or videos specific to the creation of custom Snmp or universal connectors?
Now, we actually had a webcast specifically on doing custom Snmp. I believe that was about 6 months ago, if I'm not mistaken. But if you look back in the webcast history on the SOI community, we should be able to find that there. Beyond that, though, yeah, do you know if there's any other documentation or anything that might be beneficial for that?
Well, the good news on the Snmp front is that in 3.2, all of that stuff you have to do is going to be pulled into a GUI for doing Snmp events. The other question, what was the other one that wasn't Snmp? There were two questions.
Specific to the creation of custom SNMP or universal connectors?
Yeah, universal connector not so much. I mean, universal connector is just sort of, it was originally designed as just sort of a testing tool. And people are using it in a lot of different ways. We haven't really beefed up around documenting practices and whatnot. So I don't know where that is on the roadmap or if there's plans.
There should be at least some modest set of examples in the mainline documentation, at the very least.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, that should definitely be that.
We also have another question in the Q&A from Ludovic Felton asking, I haven't had much time to try it myself, but how would I send emails for alarms that are cleared from the domain manager like Spectrum? So if an alarm is cleared from Spectrum, you want to send an email.
Do you want to send it? You want to trigger an email off the clear event coming in? Good question.
That is a good question.
There has to be a way to do it. Bo, got anything off the top of your head?
Sure. Explain. It's clear happens in the MDR. The clear event comes to SOI, and we want to send out an email at this point, right?
Right.
Yeah, that you can have an escalation policy on the clear alert. The condition will be when the alert is cleared, and you can have an action to send emails on it. That should be doable.
Okay. And Kit's saying he has a tech tip for that, so maybe we can get him in contact with him about the question.
Yeah, basically what you'll do is define the escalation policy that criteria is when the alert is cleared, and then the action would be email somebody.
Oh yeah, that's right. You can look for an attribute, and there'll be an attribute that you can look for in the escalation policy. And that's what I was thinking about.
Yeah,
Does it work on the outbound? Okay.
The actual attribute is cleared. Thank you, Gary.
Yes. That's right.
So if that equals yes, then have an action for send an email.
Yep, that's the basic answer.
So we only have about 2 minutes left here. Does anybody else have any questions? Dave, do you have any more that are from IAMs or anything?
No, I think I've run through all those. Mary, feel free to correct me. But, you know, if we want to do one last round of open forum, anybody, what's the thing, *1 to jump in?
We do have an audio question from Ludovic Felton.
Great.
Ludovic, your line is open.
Hello. Sorry, I was just trying to talk about the question I had earlier, but if you already have a tech tip on it, that's fine. I'm going to read it definitely.
Okay, well, thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Right, I do want to have one last one here from Abhishek. So any news about Nimsoft monitoring connectors? So we do have a Nimsoft monitoring connector provided by our services, by our global delivery folks. And there are some, there's talk of some plans of that transitioning to a full Nimsoft supported connector next year. So that's the best status I have. If you need additional information, let me know and we can work on it.
I had one question, too, before we finish up here. People can find what connectors are currently available. Is there any list of what connectors are in progress?
Yeah, that's a good one. We certainly have a list of connectors from our third-party connector team that is available internally. Posting that externally before we finish it is you know, a bit of a information control issue, I guess. But the if there's something specific, at the very least, if there's something specific, ping us and we can give an indication of whether that's rolling or not. Also, on the list of what's available internally, we owe, I personally owe an update to our connector matrix that's out there. So look for that shortly as well. Steve tells me that also that our HP Operations Manager connector is now available for beta as well. So if you have interest in that, let us know.
Well, we've run out of time here, but thank you all of our CA employees for joining us here and providing great answers to all these questions. And thank you for everybody that submitted questions and listened in today. If you do have any questions that did not get addressed at this point, feel free to either post them in the forums. If you've got ideas you'd like, post them on the ideas board, or feel free to email anybody in the future. But thank you, everybody, for attending, and we will talk to you again in a few months.
Thank you all.
Thank you. This concludes today's conference call. Participants, you may disconnect.